Coming up, I've just seen Spider-Man Homecoming, and I'm going to tell you what I feel about it in this episode of DIS Pop. DIS Pop is brought to you by Dreams Unlimited Travel, experts at helping you plan the perfect vacation. Be sure to visit them on the web at dreamsunlimitedtravel.com. Well, hello, everybody. I am your host, Ryno Clavin, and welcome to my movie loft. I thought this would be an appropriate area to talk about Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, it is just me. Craig and I actually went to go see two different showings. I went to the 7, he went to the 8. So I'm really curious to hear what he's going to say. So I'm going to record this, then go chat with him, but this is gonna be a little formatless, so I apologize. My thoughts are gonna be all out of the place. I literally just got out of the movie theater, rushed home here, and I wanna talk about how I feel about it after seeing the movie. So first and foremost, I enjoyed it quite a bit. This is a return to form for Spider-Man films. I don't know that I feel like this is the best Spider-Man film I've ever seen, but it's in the top 3, okay? And the other 2 are pretty great films. I'm talking the original Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, 2002, and then the follow-up in 2004, Spider-Man 2, which is considered one of the best superhero movies ever made. And I would agree. And I'll kind of break it down as to why I feel like that it's in the top 3, but what I first want to say that when The Amazing Spider-Man starring Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone came out, those to me were very unwarranted movies. Okay, the third movie, not great. Everyone pretty much universally can agree to that the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies are subpar and not necessarily warranted, and that is because, I apologize, I'm not looking at the camera, my cell phone nobody wants to talk to me until I go to record a show, and then it just keeps going off like crazy, so I just want to make sure this doesn't interrupt us. No, but they felt a little rushed, and honestly, I blamed Disney for this, because what was happening was the studio was going to make Spider-Man 4, and they had gotten Tobey Maguire back on, they'd gotten Kirsten Dunst back on, they'd gotten Sam Raimi back on, and they were going to use the Vulture. That was the villain that Sam Raimi originally wanted for Spider-Man 3, and the studio was like, no way, you've got to make Venom, people are expecting Venom, and Sam Raimi, he loves classic, like, 60s Spider-Man. He loves that type of Spider-Man. And so Venom's more contemporary. Venom showed up around the 80s, and so it was territory he was unfamiliar with, and so his passion wasn't there for that. But the studio, they wanted it in the movie regardless. So it was Sam Raimi and I believe his brother, whose name is escaping me right now, but he's in the films too. He's like Jay Jonah's, like, not Robbie, but the other guy. But they kind of set out and developed a script that didn't involve Venom, and then another screenwriter set out and developed a script that did involve Venom. And the idea was originally going to shoot these two movies, back to back. So Venom would be introduced in the first part of this movie and then show up in Spider-Man 4. And eventually it led to the studio just saying, no, merge these two ideas together, get rid of the Vulture. Nobody wants to see an old man character. Nobody likes that character. So Spider-Man 3 comes out, and clearly you can see the heavy-handed studio involvement in that movie. You know, it doesn't have that same love and passion that's there in 1 and 2. It's got parts that I would argue are pretty good. I mean, the Harry Spider-Man opening, beginning, I like certain elements of the story, how they kind of come in and play around, but overall it's not great. It's obviously not great. And the studio finally was going to do a 4th one, and you're like, okay, they can redeem it, because honestly, like, I know everyone's like, oh, Spider-Man 3, but there were 2 phenomenal movies before this, 2 of the best superhero movies made before this. So one dip in the franchise doesn't warrant rebooting. You know, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board, see what made the other 2 great, and let's go from there. But then at this time, Marvel was purchased by Disney. And essentially a lot of studios kind of panicked because they didn't want to lose their lucrative, obviously Disney buying this really means there's a value in this property still, and they didn't want to lose this sort of stuff. So Sony was like, Sam Raimi essentially said, I'm doing the 4th one, and I want the Vulture in it again. I'm using the Vulture this time. They even got as far as casting John Malkovich as the Vulture. Anne Hathaway was going to be playing his daughter, who was going to be like a Vultress. And it so it got pretty far along, and then the studio got, we don't want the Vulture, there was pushback again, and the studio essentially was like, instead of having this argument, we're just going to reboot the whole thing. And it's insane to think that, okay, rebooting is one thing. Like, they could have just kind of recast everybody, kind of had Spider-Man in the same general point in his life, and I think we could have accepted it. You know what I mean? Had it be slightly stylistic difference, but I don't think it should have regressed to Spider-Man in high school. So essentially, they were like, all right, well, we'll make him like the ultimate Spider-Man, or we'll make him the more modern day Spider-Man, the skateboarder Spider-Man, which was a horrible, I think, a horrible thing to do too. It's just one of those like disconnects between the audience, I feel like. So when I first saw The Amazing Spider-Man, I thought, okay, familiar ground, because clearly it's like, both familiar and unfamiliar. It's still the story of bit by a spider, Uncle Ben bites it, stuff we've seen and know. I mean, Spider-Man's one of the most universally treasured characters, I would argue. And so it felt repetitive and it didn't feel warranted. It did give us the Lizard, which was kind of teased in the other Spider-Man movies, so it was a new villain, but that just didn't deliver. There's a lot of issues with that movie, and someday I'll do like kind of maybe when this movie's coming out on Blu-ray, we'll kind of do like a ranking of some of them, and I'll go through individually and talk about like specifics in that movie that I have issue is. One is there's a bomb that goes off over the city that turns all the cops into lizard people, but nothing ever happens in the movie from that. Then all of a sudden they're turned back into regular people. What do those lizard people do anything, or do they just stand there and stare at the tower for forever? Whatever. I have no issue with Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. I think he actually is a good Spider-Man, and I think Emma Stone's wonderful in pretty much everything that she does. I don't really have an issue with Sally Field per se as Aunt May. I thought that Martin Sheen was great as whatchamacallit, as Uncle Ben, was really kind of the standout. So shame he bites it in the first movie, but I don't know. It wasn't great. And then there was maybe hope for the second one, and then the second one kind of played out more like Batman Forever. Like, it was a very cartoony villain. I would make an argument someday, though. I like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 more than The Amazing Spider-Man 1 for things that it aggressively tried to do differently. And for one, the score, I think, is actually really interesting. The Hans Zimmer score that he did with the other guy that I can't remember. But there was really interesting things in there. Yeah, the Electro character's stupid, but I actually don't mind the Harry Osborn Green Goblin character. There are issues with the story. It felt very rushed. But there are parts of that where I feel like if they had committed to it and not... Everything doesn't need to be a spectacle. And that's where this Spider-Man movie gets it right very well. So here we are again, and there's kind of that Spider-Man fatigue, and Sony doesn't, all these plans we've heard about Sony having this like Sinister Six movie they wanted to do, and all these other spin-off movies, and just it seemed desperate. And so finally there comes to an agreement with Disney where they're like, we need let's partner together and do something great. Like we don't want to. I think Disney didn't not want Spider-Man in their MCU, and of course, who doesn't want a part of the MCU? So they finally came to terms through a deal that you can read about online, that more and more details come out every day with that. And I'm happy to report, too, this 100% feels like a Marvel Cinematic Universe. In fact, I forgot the entire time that this kind of was a Sony with Marvel sort of situation, but it fit in, I would argue, more so than even some of the completely in-house MCU movies. So it was really interesting. And what I'm going to say that this movie does really, really well is, okay, so Spider-Man is in high school again. And one of the things that makes me sad is I love Spider-Man so much that when I was a kid, Spider-Man was in college. That's the Spider-Man I know, the 90s Fox Kids Spider-Man. We all know it. It's great. And that's the one I kind of relate to. So it was more like the Sam Raimi one was that kind of version of that character, only a little less sarcastic because he was kind of the classic Spider-Man. And then the Andrew Garfield one's like, they really wanted to bring that sass in there. And then the sass is in this one too, but balanced well. And it goes really well with his character because he's a 15-year-old. And I actually felt like this Spider-Man was 15, not Andrew Garfield, who was 30, playing a 17-year-old in two different movies. Okay, I know that Tobey Maguire was older than he was younger than Andrew Garfield was in his first Spider-Man movie. However, I know he looks older, but he's only in high school for the first 20 minutes of that movie, so it's regardless. Anyway, This movie does a really good job of really putting this character in high school, and the really interesting idea is he's in one of those oh my gosh, I forget the word for it, but it's, for essentially like accelerated kids that are geniuses, and it's all kind of tech schools to feed into that. So it was like it had that high school vibe to it, but it was distant enough from the average person who probably went to just like public school that it felt like, okay, it's high school, but it's okay if it's a little unfamiliar to me, and it's doesn't really even factor in that well. But it clearly has that John Hughes influence here, which was wonderful as well. It even made a Ferris Bueller's reference in the movie, which I greatly appreciated. Tom Holland, fantastic as the Spider-Man, and he's essentially wants to play this character until he's like 80 years old, which I think is great because that's my feelings on the other movies too. Two different franchises now, and we've been burned twice. We don't get to see what happens after a big thing, Peter and Mary don't get together. They don't get married at the end, but they forgive each other. So what's next for their relationship? Baby? I don't know. We don't know because we never got the next movie. Emma Stone's character, not in the movies anymore. What happens to Peter? And what about the thing with his parents? We don't know. We never get it. So it was kind of like, I felt like I was going to get burned. But here, it feels good. It feels really, really good. I don't want to go too far into plot specifics, but I'm just going to give you my overall impression. So, I mean, you can gather the entire plot from the trailers if you've watched any of them. It's pretty straightforward. It's essentially, it picks up, I believe the opening is like interweaved into Civil War and out of Civil War, and then the movie itself is like 2 months later. And so, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first movie, like Guardians is its own kind of thing and doesn't really involve the events of Civil War, but I think this is the first movie since Civil War that takes place like in Earth in New York. So it's interesting. It really shows how the city and how the area is, so, obviously New York, what's kind of happened since the arrival of the aliens in the first Avengers movie, the Chitauri. And I really like it because it didn't feel forced. So the Toomes character, who is the Vulture, the Michael Keaton character, wonderful villain, really good job. Really, really good job. There's also, spoiler alert, but I'm not going to tell you who they are. There are some other villains in this movie, but they don't ever overshadow the main villain, and it's never like, they're more like, you know who they are if you're a big Spider-Man fan, but you're not like, I feel like they're not villain enough to be their own villain movie, so it was a good use of that. You can kind of see one in one of the trailers, so, then there's other little nods, so when you're done with the movie, you can read all the Easter eggs and then go see it again, because I do think it might be a good movie to see twice, but, so essentially the Toomes character works for a like cleanup agency, and they got this big job about cleaning up the Chitauri, the ship, the big ship that crashed in the Avengers movie, and this other government company that's like co-funded with the Iron Man character, they take over, and it's kind of like screws this guy. And so that's kind of his motivation, is that they end up having a couple pieces of the tech. They've got a really smart guy who's like, it's too bad because we could have built all these like crazy awesome things with that. And that's kind of their thing, is their black market, or is it racketeering? Is that what it is? Wartime racketeering? I don't know. They're essentially making weapons and selling them on the black market. And so that you can see that in the trailers, in that bank scene, like, wait a minute, you guys aren't the Avengers. So that's his plots. Spider-Man he's Peter's back, and he's kind of adjusting to his life, as now he feels like he's working toward being an Avenger. So he's going out every day and just trying to like do what he's waiting for, that phone call. And essentially, he's putting his entire life on hold every day because he thinks his main calling in life is to be this Avenger. He wants to move into upstate New York, where their facility is, and he wants to like, that's his thing. And so he kind of doesn't care maybe about the high school stuff. I mean, he's got a crush in this movie, this character Liz, and so he's got the typical, like, I've got the high school crush, but I'm kind of a loser, and but I'm also like on the sideline. I'm this really cool guy, and but I can't really tell anybody I'm this really cool guy. It's very there. This movie, in all the good ways, did harken back very much to the first Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man 1, 2002 Spider-Man. In like good ways. There's a family dynamic here that I feel like is similar to the one that was present in that movie. There is that whole like Mary Jane loves Spider-Man, but Peter's her friend, that sort of a thing. I will say, I'm going to say one or two spoilers because at the very end, just because I'm a little, I don't want to give one away because it was awesome, but I do want to talk about one that you might have heard already, and it annoys me a little bit. But anyway, now to my overall impression. So, good movie, good solid movie. It's like 2 hours and 15-minute long, but it didn't really feel like that, so that's a good sign. Like I said, Tom Holland's going to be a great Spider-Man, very distinct, his very own Spider-Man, but he feels like Spider-Man. I love the friend Ned, wonderful character. I hope he sticks around for a while. You've got Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. I don't feel like she's quite as like the Aunt May impactful, like wise mentor Aunt May that we're used to, because she's a little bit younger, but they do a really good job of like, clearly this woman is adjusting to something in her life, which would be the passing of her husband. So, she's like, people talk about how hot she is, but then you see her and you're like, she looks a little like a woman on the edge a little bit sometimes, but like, it was good. Marissa Tomei was good. She's got a couple moments, nothing really like major memorable for me. If anybody's worried about Tony Stark overshadowing this movie or it being like Spider-Man and Iron Man, you don't gotta worry. He is essentially, it boils down to a cameo, and I feel like they almost showed almost all of his scenes in the trailers. So he's got a really good one toward the end, though, too. I think they used him just appropriate enough, and this is another one of those reasons why I think this fits into the MCU beautifully, is that it like it feels not only like a great carry-on from Civil War, but it's also like a nice little tack on to Tony's story, because a lot of this is stuff that comes full circle from Iron Man, because he has become the mentor, and the thing he learned in Iron Man 3 was about, and a lot of people, some complaints about Iron Man 3 are that like it's a Tony Stark movie, and I'm like, that's what I love about Iron Man 3, because it shows that he's a superhero not because of the suit, but because of who he is. Yeah, it's partly the suit, but it's like the character too, and I feel like this is him trying to imbue Peter with that knowledge of that. So I also really like the spider suit. I love that it's like clearly, Tony Stark built this. It's influenced by Tony Stark. I love that it's this is a Spider-Man for the 21st century. This is very technologically oriented Spider-Man, which is great because we never even really got that inventor side in any of the other movies. Like, he was smart, and you've got scenes where the web shooters in the first The Amazing Spider-Man, and you see it a little bit in the Sam Raimi ones, but like Peter's highly intelligent, and this one is really like, this one kind of comes up to that, and they did there are moments where I was getting to the movie where I was like, okay, like, all right, now it's getting, like, Spider-Man's getting a little child, and I'm like, but he is a child, and that's what's great, like, because just when you're almost like, oh god, this kid's frustrating me a little bit, they pull it on you. They pull you on the story. Like, there's this really great scene with Peter under a bunch of rubble where he's like crying and panicking, and I thought it was beautiful. I thought the shot was a little reminiscent of like when Peter leaves the suit in the dumpster in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, or I'm sorry, not the Amazing Spider-Man, just Spider-Man 2, or the other ones where it's like the lightning and the thing goes on. But that is Spider-Man too. That is like comic book Spider-Man, the half Peter's face, half Spider-Man face, and there's a really cool shot there. But like, it was a really good acting moment, really, really good, really solid, and it really kind of solidified that moment where he's like, it's not necessarily, this movie isn't like how Spider-Man 2 was the push and pull between am I Peter, am I Spider-Man, in the Aunt May big wisdom in that is, sometimes we give up the things we love the most. And, this one's more like, how do you create the foundation of who you want to be? And so Peter's so focused on wanting to be that Avenger, but he's essentially, there's a part in the movie where he's like, I'm not even going to go to school anymore. I'm already going to be an Avenger. So, and it's kind of like, kid, you've got to, so, and the friend's like, are you going to be a high school dropout? And so I thought that was there's a really cool, like, where Peter realizes he needs to live his life. And he can do this, and so it's kind of like Peter realizes he's got to grow up. This is the whole thing where it's that typical, like, kid, he's right in that perfect age where he wants to be the adult, but he's not an adult yet, He's only 15 years old in this movie, jeez. Yeah, so I thought they captured that stuff really beautifully. It doesn't happen often in movies where I go, where I'm like shocked by something that happens. And there is, and I feel like this is a spoiler by saying this. I'm not going to say what it is because it is really good, but they did a really good moment where I was like, in the movie theater, very surprised. And I was like, yeah. And the scene that followed this, I was like really, really into. Again, Michael Keaton is just great in this, as this villain, There is another thing I want to talk about really quick. I am running out of time a little bit because I gave myself 30 minutes here. And it is, so I'm going to hold my hand up because this is a spoiler, and I'll put my hand down when I'm done talking about it if you're watching. If you're listening, I'm talking about it for like a minute and a half. I guess stop listening here and see the movie, then finish listening. But, okay. Zendaya, I don't know who this actress is before this. I knew it was like, oh, she's in this movie. Like, who's this mysterious character? And they don't say her name for a good portion of the beginning of the movie, and then they say it during the Washington, D.C. scene. They call her Melissa, and you're like, oh, okay, all right, because I was like, oh, maybe she's Mary Jane, or maybe she's MJ. Like, I don't care if she's MJ. I like this character. I thought she was like the oddball out, but kind of cool and notices stuff, and I enjoyed that, and I'm going to tell you, in the end of the movie, she's like, oh, my friends call me MJ, and I'm like, okay. It's not that she's MJ that bothers me. It's that they like changed Mary Jane's name. Why didn't they just call her Mary before? And it would have been fine. Like, and I would have been okay with it. It didn't need to be a surprise. I thought that was cheap. Like, by like not saying a character's name the whole movie, and then it's kind of cheap. So I had an issue with that. That's really my only complaint about the movie, though. It's minor. It's just kind of like one of those, like, of all the things in the movie, that felt kind of like a little gimmicky, but the rest was pretty solid and heartfelt. So there is one more. I lost it. There was one more spoiler I was going to talk about. There are cameos from other people that I think are pretty fantastic. I won't even say it because I think people should be surprised when they see this cameo. But it was another moment where I was like, oh. So I was super happy about this person being in this movie, and I winked as if you know what it is, but it looked like a facial spasm. There are 2 end credit scenes. I'm going to put the hand down. There are 2 end credit scenes. One midway, one at the very end. I'm not going to tell you what either of them are, but they're definitely worth staying for. Especially the one at the very end is a little tongue in cheek. It's very funny. Yeah, but I really enjoyed it. I'm going to say really quick. Sorry, I've said 30 million times. The reason why I think this is, it's not necessarily that it's weaker than Spider-Man, the original first two Tobey Maguire movies. There's nothing about that. I think it's really going to come down to style and preference. I think some people are going to go to this movie and say, this is the best Spider-Man movie I've ever seen. And that's going to be great. And I won't disagree with them. It's not my favorite, just for stylistic. That's all. In the original Raimi movies, and all of the Raimi movies, there is a very distinct and unique style to filming. It is clearly his influence as a horror director is very present on a lot of shot choices, from down to the Doc Ock scene where the chainsaw comes up, and some of them feel a little like cheesy. I mean, that's kind of what Spider-Man's can be, cheesy sometimes. But then there's like shots where in the first one, when the Green Goblin drops the elevator full of the kids and Mary Jane, and there's that shot where one's going one way, one's going the other way in his eyes. That's one of my favorite shots. I love the falling scene too, where the thing goes in slow motion and blows the stuff off his face. I love the opening where he's drawing his suit and all the spiders crawling across the screen. In Spider-Man 2, the scene where he uses his spider sense, and he's like at the table with Mary Jane. You remember this one? It was the trailer for the movie, and he goes, and it just pans back to the car. There's a lot of, and then Doc Ock shows, and it's like boom, boom, and the music matches the footprints, and it keeps zooming in. The alleyway in the original movie where he puts his hands on the wall for the first time, it's like boom, boom, bump, 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 and the Danny Elfman score is going. There's a lot of moments like that, very unique, iconic moments that really are marked by a really cool stuff like that. And I thought that. I thought. Sorry, Craig is telling me he's out, so we got to go talk about this. So, I thought that this movie lacked that a little bit. And I honestly think that a lot of the movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe lack this, with the exception of the Avengers movie. I think Joss Whedon did try for some of that really cool shots. There's that really long panning one shot in the Avengers. There's the cool shots where they're all like come together. There's a lot of really cool choreography in that. And then the Guardians movies, I think, are the ones that come closest to this. But I get it. They want it to all look like one giant picture, so it all kind of looks the same. That's my only complaint about this. There was no real like, oh, that's a really cool shot. There's like one quick moment where it's like from his eye perspective with his hands on the ship that I thought was really neat, but there's no like, my mom will even say, I'll say, Mom, what's your favorite part of all the Spider-Man movies? And she'll say at the end of the first Spider-Man movie, when he's swinging through New York City, like you felt like you were moving with him. I remember that feeling, that rush of like going through the city, and it was so great. And then they did it again at the end of the second one, or that scene where he's going in the second one and it pulls out of his eye and it's Doc Ock's eye watching him, and then he crawls up the building. Like, there's a lot of really awesome moments like that they really flip. You've got a camera, like, get create, you know what I mean? There's clearly like this guy, but that's a labor of love and a stylistic choice too. This guy, I believe John Watts, this might be his like first big motion picture movie, which is great. Well done, sir. Well done. You did a great job. I'd say excellent. And that's really what it comes down to me, is that it's just almost missing that beauty that was like the first two Spider-Man movies, like the color palettes, they're distinctly different, but like any moment I could kind of freeze frame that movie and just kind of point out things I love about the coloring, the sound, the score, the choice of camera shots. There's a lot of that very present in this, and this one felt a little more basic. There was never a moment where I was like, I'm swinging with Spider-Man, but. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying that is, I feel like if they can get there, if this next movie can be as good as this one and get there stylistically, I'm telling you, this will be the best Marvel movie that's ever been made. So that's my feelings on it. If you've seen the movie, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Tweet at us, DizPopShow. Tweet at me personally. I'm sorry I didn't really go into any more, but I've talked a lot. I'm really jazzed up about the movie. Got to go talk to this fool about it now too. Leave comments if you're watching this on YouTube, wherever. Let's chat about it. I want to know what you liked. I want to know what you didn't like, if there are things you didn't like, because I don't really have a complaint about it, really. This is definitely one of my favorite MCU movies, so they are on fire, because Guardians was great, this was great, just a lot of great stuff churning out. So let me know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next episode of DizPop.